This video deals with the constant accusation that Zionism equals racism. Now, I gotta be honest with you, when I went into the books and started looking for the actual arguments in favor and against this equation, I was pretty surprised. It is very, very difficult to find real arguments, both supporting or negating the equation between Zionism and racism. Not to say that there aren't any, I'm going to provide you with a few in this movie, but it's quite unbelievable. And one of the things I strongly recommend that you do is, beyond the arguments you hear in this video, look at the files we've attached here on the bottom. Look at resolution, the United Nations resolution from 1975 accepting the equation. Then look at the corrected United Nations resolution from 1991 rescinding the resolution. I strongly encourage you to look into these documents, read what people had to say beyond what I'm going to present to you, because it's quite unbelievable. One of the most notorious accusations that has to do with Israel actually lacks an amazing amount of information that can actually be used as rational arguments. So I did some thinking and I tried to see for myself, just based on my regular knowledge, how can I prove to somebody that Zionism isn't racism? So, of course, beyond the formal definition of Bernard Lewis, a very, very famous Middle Eastern historian, and many others, that Zionism really is just a form of a national calling for independence, much like the calling of the people of Tibet, much like the calling of the Palestinians. I think the strongest argument I could think about, which actually proved that Zionism isn't racism, comes not from the definition of Zionism, but actually from the definition of racism. Racism is a very, very severe form of discrimination where the focal point in order to create that discrimination has to do with the racial, physiological characteristics of an individual or of a group. So when we say that there's racial discrimination, let's say that there used to be racial discrimination in the United States, we're talking about a racial discrimination by people who were white, a physical characteristic, a certain form of race, against people who were black. Same thing happened in the apartheid of South Africa, and happens all the time around the world. Now, Zionism doesn't deal with any form of race. It does deal with a social identity, with an historical identity, even with a religious one, but it's not racial. It's not a certain race to be Jewish. You can say that you belong to the Jewish people. You can say that you accept the Jewish heritage. But the very fact that somebody can convert to be Jewish is an indication that Zionism and Judaism are not racial. Now, some people will say, yeah, but Judaism says that if you're born to a Jewish mother, you're automatically Jewish, which means you inherit it by birth. That's okay, but it doesn't make it racial. And it's not like a Chinese or a Japanese person can stop being Chinese or Japanese. It's a physical attribute. It's genetic. That doesn't mean that they can't change other forms of their identity. So if you're Japanese, Chinese, black, you can still decide to be Muslim, Christian, or Jewish. So from that respect, and that's the first argument we're going to look at today, Zionism cannot be racism because Zionism doesn't deal in any form with race. Now, some people will say, I'm being technical. When they say that Zionism is racism, talking about the spirit of the discrimination of being Jewish versus the people who are not Jewish. We can talk about that as well. And one of the things we're going to look at in the next video is what forms of discrimination are acceptable, and we can find them all around, and what forms of discrimination are unacceptable. And even if you feel that there are forms of discrimination that are unacceptable within the framework of Zionism, that's totally legitimate. We can talk about that. But it still doesn't make it racist, because racism is about physical race, and Zionism has nothing to do with that.